All right, people, thanks a lot for joining this CIF seminar. I'm really happy to have here Professor Elina Eriksson from KTH Stockholm and Professor Anne-Kathrin. Anne-Kathrin is done. No, she's still there. Anne-Kathrin Peters, also from KTH. And they're going to talk about, I think, about feelings, right? So something engineers usually don't talk that much about. And how to deal with them. So the interesting thing is that we're here at the university where you can basically get a degree in computer science and electronics without a mandatory course on ethics even. And I think it might be really interesting to see what might happen if we change that, if we talk about sustainability and environmental impacts of our research. So I'm excited. Elina and Anne-Kathrin, the floor is yours, and I'll shut up.
Thank you. Beyond for inviting us. So I really ran this letter for coming here to insight and introduction. So I'm going to do it from a very small thing, opening up to a much larger end of the lecture or presentation. So I'm going to start with the paper that got published at the CIF conference in June. The title address students' equity when teaching sustainability in higher education. So written by me, Katrin, Björnhedin, Sandra. Okay, so Lennart Oldham saying that his audio is stuttering. I hope not on my side. I'm supposed to be on.
Elina, your audio got very bad right now.
I don't know why, because I didn't change anything, and I'm on a Wi-Fi, but nothing else. I'm trying to turn on my Wi-Fi to really make sure that I'm on the.
I don't know, maybe we just switch cameras off for a second and see if that resolves the issue, and let's see. Elina? I think Elina got somehow disconnected.
Hello, am I back again?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so now I turned off my Wi-Fi, so I shouldn't be on Wi-Fi anymore. And then, yes, Lennart says audio sounds great. Perfect.
Yes, much better. Thanks a lot. Okay, maybe just start again because we missed the first.
Yeah, definitely. I should maybe correct you also. I'm not a professor. I'm an associate professor at the Northern Europe's best technical university. We have excellent Wi-Fi here. I should also turn on my camera so that you can see me. I'm going to do this presentation starting from a small example and then widening up towards the end of the presentation. And I'm going to start with this paper, Addressing Students' Eco-Anxiety When Teaching Sustainability in Higher Education, which is co-written with Anne-Kathrin, who's here, and also Daniel Pargman, Björn Hedin, Minna Larell Torslund, and Sandra Sjö. So this paper was presented and published at the ICT for S conference in June. So to give you some background, we're teaching a course, an introductory course to sustainability for our media technology students. So it's now taught in the bachelor's program, so it's mandatory for our bachelor students. And we also have exchange students and some master students taking the course. We've been teaching this since 2012, and it was a head of university decision that every program should have at least a 7.5 credit course on sustainability. And the course has grown over the years. So now we have, last year we had 90 students, and this year we have a whopping 127 students taking the course. But it's basically to teach them about sustainability in general, but also connecting it to their own program and computing in general. I'm going to start out with the most interesting results from this study. So the study was about eco-anxiety. We've noticed that the students, they feel things when we teach this subject, and we wanted to explore that a little bit more. So we had a development project last year, last course round. And at the very end of the course, we asked them in the course questionnaire, what kind of feelings they had before the course. So that's the first row in this table. And then we asked them what kind of feelings they had after the course. And just to show you some of the results, it turned out that after the course or during the course, they had more hopelessness or felt more hopelessness. And also that they felt less happiness after the course. And that was a significant change. But I should also point out that they also perceived that they had less anxiety. So while they were less happy and more hopeless, they felt less anxiety, which I think is pretty important because anxiety can be an emotion that really hinders you in your everyday life. And we should also say that in the same course evaluation, we asked them if they had little or a lot of emotions during the course. And we also asked them if they thought that was a good or a bad thing. And what happened was that they saw it as a positive thing. So the more emotions they said on a scale that they had during the course, even though those emotions were negative, they actually thought that was a good thing. So you might be wondering, what the heck have we been doing? What have we been doing with these students? So I want to point out that it's pretty important to address these things. Young people are already worried. There's many surveys, international surveys, that show that young people feel anxiety and they are worried about their future. They feel hopeless and they think that there's something going on that's wrong in the world, including climate change and other environmental issues. And in the first 2 weeks on this course, we basically go through more general sustainability issues. And I'm calling them predicaments here because they're not problems that are easily solved. And there are many of them. I mentioned climate change. I mentioned biodiversity loss, or the sixth mass extinction, or the fact that we are overstepping several planetary boundaries. In terms of social sustainability, we're not having an equality or equal distribution of resources over the world, etc., etc. And we know that the students find these weeks pretty tough. It's not that they don't know about these things, but they haven't probably looked into it in any detail. I mean, they're taking a media technology bachelor class or program. So they came to this education not because they're particularly interested in sustainability, but rather that they're interested in computing and media technology. But so these first 2 weeks are often quite heavy for them. And the course in general, we've noticed, engages the students a lot, some more than others, but we have had a fair share of people who tell us that they become vegans or vegetarians during the course. Yeah, they become very, very engaged in the topic. So before the course started last year, we went through and decided that we wanted to read up on eco-anxiety, and we find this excellent paper by a Finnish researcher called Panu Pihkala. It has 300 references, pretty much. And in that paper, besides just doing a review of research done around emotions connected to climate change and other environmental issues, he also comes with recommendations for educators. So he has 8 recommendations for educators, and these are the ones on the screen. So self-reflection and inner work by the educator, validating various ecological emotions and experience of eco-anxiety among the students, admitting that the educators themselves feel difficult emotions, providing information about coping with eco-anxiety, offering students chances to discuss their emotions, if possible, offering students chances to embodied activities. Collective action is also something that we might not be able to do together with the students, but we could also at least inform them about how one can engage in collective action. And maintaining balance, remembering joy, and upholding meaningfulness. So eco-anxiety here is a kind of umbrella concept. So there are many different emotions that you can have when you're starting to address issues about environmental sustainability. It could be grief, it could be anger, frustration, and these emotions are not bad in themselves, but if you have them and you can't work through them, they can have detrimental effect on your mental health and also your everyday life. So that's why it's important to address these things. So I'm now going to give you 2 examples of what we did in the course. When we looked at the course, we saw that there were things that we were already doing that actually went in line with these recommendations, but we also made some smaller changes to the course. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. And if you want to read all of what we did, I recommend you to read the paper. It's a pretty easy read. So one of the things that we realized that we already were doing that was good were the discussion seminars. And actually, I just came from this year's course round seminars. So I have been sitting with my students for 2 hours just before this presentation. And I loved it. So with our seminars, we are working towards the recommendation validating various ecological emotions and experience of eco-anxiety among the students and offering students chances to discuss their emotions. And the thing is, we don't tell them that you have to tell us what emotions you have. It's not that we force them, but rather that we invite the students to do this if they feel that it's necessary. And our seminars are made up so that in the end of the 5 last week of the course, the students themselves every week submit a question to the seminar. So the first step is that they actually formulate themselves what is important to them to discuss. And then we can't have 127 questions for the seminar. So Daniel, who's the course leader, he reads through them and collates them, take away some questions, maybe merge them, etc., etc. So we end up with 1 sheet of paper where there's about 30 questions that comes from the students. And then we go to the seminar. And in the seminar, we have, through trial and error, come to this practice that we sit in a circle. So we actually move the tables away from the floor and then we sit in a circle. And that's a way of making sure that everybody's present in the particular thing we're discussing. They can't have the computers in front of them. But it's also very conductive for having a more safe environment to talk in. And we also do a check-in. We ask how the students are feeling, and then they get to vote on what questions this particular student group, about 15 students, want to discuss in the seminar. And it's not that it's always that there are possibilities, like they're not always submitted questions that directly addresses emotions, but there is a room for it if they want to do it. And also asking the students how they are feeling that particular week and maybe asking them about what they thought about the lectures, etc., also opens up for them to share if they feel anything in particular. We have an example of, we started this practice of asking the students how they are during COVID, since everybody was in lockdown and at home. And then there was a student in my colleagues group who said, I have been 5 years at the university and nobody has ever asked me how I am. And he felt that that was very important and that he felt very welcomed into the group when someone asked him how he was. So I think this is important. So this is one example of something we already were doing that was actually quite good in relation to holding space for the students to potentially discuss difficult emotions. Okay, and the second example that I'm going to talk about is that we wanted somehow to give the students an opportunity to see other examples of how to cope with eco-anxiety. So in the end of the first 2 weeks, in the last lecture, we introduced a teacher panel. So Minna, who's on the picture here, and Daniel and me, we stood in front of the students and we had a Menti where we encouraged the students to send any kind of question to us, even personal questions. And then we had another PhD student who was the moderator. So it was anonymous to send in the questions, and Arjun, our PhD student, he moderated and asked the questions to us teachers. And in last year, they asked us whether or not we were vegetarians or vegans and why, if we weren't. They also asked if we preached what we, or if we, if we were doing the things that we were talking about in the course, if we were living as we were teaching. And then they asked us, in regards of everything they've heard during the first 2 weeks, how do we cope? Those were the 3 questions that we answered. And we gave very different answers because we are very different people. So that would then go towards the recommendation that we as educators should admit that we also have difficult emotions, and also providing information about coping with eco-anxiety, that there are many different ways of doing this. Right. So that was the things that we did with the course in particular. And I'm actually thinking that, okay, I'll do my presentation and we'll take all the questions afterwards. But now I'll switch a little bit. So I will take a step back and tell you about something that we haven't published any information on. So besides the things we did in the course, we also had a small project where we were looking into other things, and we called this the side activity. And we're going to, of course, write something about this, but it will take a little bit longer. So in the side activity, we wanted to, we were quite inspired by Active Hope by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnson. And we wanted to explore more fully human participation in sustainability issues. So we asked for students to volunteer, and it was quite hard to find students out of these 90 who wanted to volunteer for something outside coursework. But in the end, we had 7 students who attended. And what they went through was they had 4 meetings, and it was Minna Laurel Torslund and our teaching assistant Sandra Sjö, who took the course like the year previous, who did this with the students. So they had 4 meetings on the side. The first one, they were building trust, and they did some journaling and just getting to know each other. In the second meeting, they took a walk in nature. We have a very beautiful forest just on the other side of these buildings. So they had a walk in nature where they, for example, walked in silence. And during that walk in silence, they had to pick up a stone and carry the stone with them, a small stone. And then at the end of the walk, they convened at a spot in the forest where they build a cairn of mourning. So they all put the stones in a pile, and while doing that in silence, they also commemorated lost species or other things that might become lost to us due to climate change. And then they had a discussion or around the work that reconnects, which is what Joanna Macy and Chris Johnson presents in their book, Active Hope. We also had one meeting where the students listened to Dougal Pine from the Dark Mountain Project. And first he gave a 40-minute presentation about his perspective on the future, where also us teachers could be present and listen to him. But after that, the students stayed with Dougal. So they were alone with him and could ask any kind of questions around these issues. And the last meeting, they did improvisation exercises. So using their bodies and improvisation to explore other aspects of sustainability. They were also invited to fill out a reflective journal each week. So they got a prompt once a week to fill out a journal, asking them about emotions that they had around the course or otherwise in their life, and also doing a gratefulness exercise each week. And this is also something that we as teachers did. So we also filled in reflective journal through the whole course last year. And then finally, we met up, both teachers and the students, for a debrief. I don't want to call it an evaluation because it sounds boring. So we had like a co-creative debrief where we stayed in 2 different rooms, but we met and shared our experience of doing these exercises during the course. So I only have some very initial results. As I said, it was quite hard to recruit students, but we got these 7 volunteers. They so much afterwards appreciated the whole thing. They actually said that all students should go through this. And they had, we have lots and lots of data, both from the sessions where Minna and Sandra took notes, but also from the debrief, that they, it had been like eye-opening for them to address sustainability through these other means, that they had felt very, it had a calming effect on them to do this together with others, and that they had formed very tight bonds with these people that they had these meetings with, and they highly appreciated it. But perhaps most surprising, I would actually say that it did something with us teachers. So, and this is not something that just happened then and there in December last year, but it's something that has followed us for a whole year. And I think that doing this reflective journaling and just in general addressing these issues around emotional states and what this material does to our student and us was very important. And it's an ongoing work, so I think there will be other things coming out of this later on. Okay, I think I have talked very quickly, but that leaves more room for questions. So now I'm gonna zoom out even further and have like one more step backwards and talk about inner transition then, because addressing eco-anxiety with my students, that is a way of holding them or handling whatever emotions that might come up when I'm teaching this subject. And the side activity was a way of looking at sustainability from other parts or inviting us to be full human in the sustainability topic. And all of this is part of maybe a larger movement, which is about inner transition. So to ground this, I'm going to turn back to Donella Meadows and her leverage points. So Donella Meadows, 1999, she published this paper on leverage points, points where you can try to change a system. And there's 12 of them. The one with the lower number are probably easier to change, but they might not change the system as much. And the highest leverage points are goals of the system, paradigm underpinning the system, or even the power to transcend paradigms. So these are points that in many systems, not all of them, but in many systems have a much higher leverage. So if you're able to change these points, you have a much bigger chance of an actual system change. And there's researchers then that have connected this to looking at our societal system, to our culture, and actually on ourselves, and realizing that if you want to work with these higher leverage points, you actually have to go inwards and talk about our perspective of being in the world from the inside. So what we're talking about here is actually a paradigm shift. So what is needed is not only to do more energy efficiency or inventing more technology that can solve the problem, but rather changing how we are in the world and our stance and how we act in the world, which is deeply ingrained in our culture and such. So I'm not entirely sure what the new paradigm would be, but I know that you can find clues in many different places. For example, if you look to indigenous knowledge, etc., etc. But one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is these dichotomies that we in the Western modern culture really want to divide things up into either or. So it's either body or mind. It's either humans or nature or rational thought compared to emotions and passive and active. And also that we put some kind of idea of one of these are better than the other. And I'm pretty inspired here by a philosopher, a Swedish philosopher called Jonna Bornemark. Unfortunately, she has mostly written in Swedish, but I've heard, yay, that she's going to be translated into English. So I'm looking forward to be able to tell everybody to read her books in English. And she actually invites us to consider, especially when you look at this last one here, passive-active, that what if we could actually be pactive? What would that be? And she uses both childbirth and riding a horse as an example. So in neither childbirth or riding a horse, you as a person are in total control. So when giving birth, there are these forces that kind of works in your body that you can't really stop. But on the other hand, you're not totally passive to this. You can actually actively engage with this force and kind of steer it a little bit. And similarly, when you're riding a horse, you're not passively sitting on the horse and the horse makes all the work, but you're actually engaging and you're so you're kind of active in steering the horse. But on the other hand, you're not totally active because you have to have this collaboration with the horse if you want to have a good riding experience. So she talks about pactivity as this merging or integration of two different concepts. And I think that this is something that we need for all of these different dichotomies. And if you look at the exercises or the things we did in the side activity, that was actually a way of trying to merge or integrate the body and the mind, for example, and also the rational thought and emotions to have this better integration. And actually now, Anne, I don't know if you can speak, but you are invited to talk about this slide.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Elina?
Yes.
Yes. Is it an echo?
It's all good.
Good. Yes. So I've been thinking a lot about dichotomies, and especially in IT education. And as we got the opportunity to speak here about our work, I thought I want to tell you a little bit about my research that suggests that what Elina and Anja are doing is really important and also quite unique. So I've been researching norms and values in IT, looking at what happens in IT education and how students are socialized into norms and values, and perhaps also get opportunities to change and challenge norms and values that are there. So I have followed more than 20 students through 3 years of their education to see who they become. And then I chose possibly or very diverse students, or as diverse as possible. Like, for example, a student who came from political science, who was very interested in doing IT for like globalization, for a global world, and a student interested in art, and a student who had been sitting in the basement working on hardware and these things. And I was then curious to see what different meanings and norms or values we see in IT, what different ways of relating to the discipline. And what I found in this work, and there is a summarizing article also published that I could send to you, is that the student all aligned to a very specific way of making sense of IT that is very much based on dichotomies and positioning IT as technical rather than social, rational rather than emotional, objective rather than subjective. And so I give you one example. This is a reflection that came from the political science student, a student who had almost finished a political science degree program. So he was quite experienced as a student when he entered IT. He did so because he was thinking he might not get a job within politics. And he was also obviously curious about computing. And when I talked to him at the end of the first year, he says, and I asked him then, how do politics and computing connect? And he was, well, what a question. It connects, like the connection between computer science and political science comes naturally. And he said he was very interested in globalization, and said that computing has changed the way we live globally as a global society, the ways we communicate. And he, as a computer scientist, will be able to kind of develop that process, complex process, in another way than someone who doesn't have insights in politics. So then when I met him again in year 2, he was like, well, I'm not thinking about politics anymore. Now I'm really interested in backend programming. It's like, what's that? Well, that is like the really difficult technical problems that are very difficult and technical. And yeah, that's what we kind of do. And that's what's really interesting. But then I thought maybe next year when he would take the human-computer interaction course, this human perspective, society perspective will come back. But actually what happened is that he took a stance and said, no, this is not us. This is not computing. He said, I think one misses a lot when combining politics and computer science. Political science is about discussion without getting anywhere. The only way to come to a point of right or wrong is to look at reality. In computer science, it often feels like I want to do a better solution. One tries, can I do this algorithm slightly faster? As this is a theoretical, a natural science discipline, one can always test the solution in a very small, secure environment. So I'm kind of then asking, what are we doing in education? We all obviously are quite in a power position forming students. And here you can see these dichotomies that are being produced. A student who was interested in political science leaves that to relate to computing as purely technical, as something different from reality. You work in like special, small, secure environment where you can always like test and be certain about things. Like you do theoretical stuff, natural science. Yeah, you do algorithms and focus on doing things slightly faster. So that's about, yeah, efficiency then. So when I was then getting in touch with Elina and also sitting in the classroom with Elina and Daniel and the other teachers, I was really curious what would happen and how we could engage with the students in emotions. Would they perhaps reject this? What happens in the interaction? I was kind of thinking that they are really coming up against norms and values. Now I think their student might be like not so technical, those computing that I followed, computer science, but still I think this work with emotions and also thinking about dichotomies is really really important. And I think, yeah, it's an ongoing journey how we can do that, also working with hope and hopelessness and, yeah, these different emotions. So I think it's a very interesting, important journey. Yes.
Thank you, Anne. As Anne said, this is an ongoing journey, so I'm not sure where we are exactly, and when we will never come to an end state, but rather continue exploring this, I think. One thing I can say is that what I would like to bring into our education more is a better awareness of the interconnectedness of the world, of ourselves with natural environment, and seeing ourselves not outside of nature, but as part of nature. I also think that it's super important to do this integration of different dichotomies, because I think we miss out on many important topics to both research and study and learn about when we have these divisions. And I also think it's important to also start looking at relations and not only objects and artifacts, but actually relational issues, both in what we do and what we teach. So this is where I'm standing in terms of exploring this new paradigm, which I hope will grow and come. And with that, my and Anne's presentation is actually finished, and you're free to ask questions, but we also have questions for you. So have you had an emotional response to anything related to sustainability? And have you experienced that students have emotional responses to the material you're teaching, and how did you handle it? And what in this presentation made sense for you? So if you don't ask me questions, I can always ask you questions. Thank you very much for listening, and I invite you to ask questions.